I opened my classroom door, and the principal said, "3 students accused you of assault during yesterday's field trip." I stood in the doorway of Principal Victoria Brennan's office at Westridge Academy, still holding my laptop bag and travel mug from the parking lot, unable to process what she'd just said. My name is David Kowalski, and I'd been teaching AP History at this private school for 11 years. I'd arrived for Monday morning planning period, expecting to review last week's essays and prepare for my Civil War unit. Instead, Victoria sat behind her mahogany desk with the school's attorney, Gerald Hutchins, and someone from the district's Title IX office whose nameplate read, Christina Valdez. Their expressions were stone-faced, and there was a stack of manila folders between them. Victoria spoke again when I didn't respond. 3 female students have filed formal complaints alleging you physically assaulted them during the field trip to Independence Hall on Saturday. We need to understand what happened. I finally found my voice. That's impossible. I wasn't on that field trip. I was scheduled to chaperone, but I had to pull out 3 weeks ago when my father had his heart attack. I spent Saturday at Jefferson Medical in Philadelphia with my family. My brother can confirm everything. My father was in ICU. Victoria's expression didn't shift. According to our records, you were listed as one of 4 chaperones on the trip. The students say you cornered them separately in restricted areas of the building and made inappropriate physical contact. 2 say you grabbed their arms hard enough to leave bruises. 1 says you pushed her against a wall. Gerald Hutchins leaned forward, hands folded on the desk. Mr. Kowalski, we've reviewed the signed chaperone roster from Saturday morning. Your signature appears on the attendance sheet. The bus driver's log shows 4 adults departing with 32 students. 3 students have provided detailed, consistent accounts of incidents that occurred during the tour. These are serious allegations of physical assault against minors. I felt the room closing in. I wasn't there. Check my phone records, my hospital visitor log, my credit card statements. I was at Jefferson Medical all day Saturday. My father had complications from his bypass surgery. I was there from 7 a.m. until after midnight. I never left the hospital. Christina Valdez spoke for the first time, her voice professionally neutral. Mr. Kowalski, we understand this is distressing, but we have mandatory reporting obligations. The police have been notified. Child Protective Services is involved. The 3 students, Ashley Morgenstein, Kayla Dennison, and Sophie Blackwell, have given statements describing specific incidents at specific times during the tour. We need to take these allegations seriously. Take them seriously by investigating the facts, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I have documentation proving I was at a hospital 90 miles away when these alleged assaults occurred. Someone signed my name on that roster, but it wasn't me. Someone impersonated me on that trip. Victoria opened one of the folders. The students identified you by name and physical description. Ashley says you were wearing a blue Westridge polo and khakis, which matches what you typically wear on field trips. Kayla described your watch, a silver Seiko with a leather band. Sophie mentioned your reading glasses, the ones you wear when reviewing documents. These are specific details. I looked down at my wrist. The Seiko was there, same as always. The glasses were in my shirt pocket. Standard details anyone who'd seen me around school could describe. Those are generic observations. Anyone could describe what I usually wear, but they can't put me at Independence Hall because I wasn't there. Check the hospital security footage. Check my EZ pass record showing my car never left the city. This is a setup, and I need to know why. Gerald stood, his expression grave. Mr. Kowalski, we're placing you on immediate administrative leave with pay pending the outcome of the investigation. We'll need your building access badge, your school laptop, and your classroom keys. A police detective will contact you to schedule a formal interview. I strongly advise you to retain legal counsel. I handed over my badge and keys, my mind already racing through Saturday. I'd woken up to a call from my brother Thomas at 6:30 a.m. saying our father had developed an infection and was being moved to ICU. I'd driven straight to Jefferson Medical, parked in the visitor garage, and spent 16 hours at the hospital while doctors stabilized him. My mother, Thomas, my sister Grace, and I had taken shifts staying with him, coordinating with medical staff, making decisions about his care. I had parking garage receipts, text messages with family coordinating schedules, food purchases from the hospital cafeteria, even photos I'd taken of the monitors when the doctors wanted to show us the improvements in his vitals. I walked out of Westridge Academy in a fog. Students were arriving for first period, backpacks slung over shoulders, laughing about weekend activities. A few glanced at me as I passed, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something else. Word traveled fast in private schools. Within hours, everyone would know something serious had happened involving Mr. Kowalski. I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process this. 3 students had accused me of assault during a trip I hadn't attended. Someone had signed my name on the attendance roster. Someone had been there impersonating me, or the students were deliberately lying. Either scenario required planning, coordination, malice. I called Thomas from the parking lot. He was stunned when I explained what happened. "But you were at the hospital all day Saturday. We have dozens of witnesses, the nursing staff, other visitors, hospital security cameras. This is insane." I needed him to start documenting everything. Times I'd arrived and left, specific nurses and doctors who'd interacted with us, locations of security cameras that would have captured me. He started making lists while I drove home, his voice tight with anger. "Who would do this? Who would accuse you of assaulting students when you were taking care of Dad?" That was the question burning through my mind. I'd been teaching at Westridge for over a decade. I had strong relationships with students, positive evaluations from administrators, letters of recommendation from parents whose children had gone on to prestigious universities. I'd never been accused of inappropriate conduct, never had disciplinary issues, never gave anyone reason to question my professionalism. But private schools were political environments. Parents paid $45,000 a year for their children to attend Westridge. That kind of investment created expectations, entitlement, pressure. I'd had conflicts with parents over grades, over college recommendation letters I'd declined to write for students who hadn't earned them, over my refusal to inflate grades for students who'd plagiarized work. 3 specific students had made accusations. Ashley Morgenstein, Kayla Dennison, Sophie Blackwell. I knew all 3. They were juniors in my AP history class, smart students, but not my strongest performers. Ashley had been angry when I'd given her a B+ on a major research paper she'd believed deserved an A. Her mother had sent heated emails questioning my grading criteria. Kayla had been caught using her phone during a test last month. I'd given her a 0 on the exam per school policy, which had dropped her grade from an A to a B. Her father had demanded I allow a retake, which I'd refused. Sophie was different. Brilliant student, one of my best, but her parents were going through a contentious divorce. Her mother had requested meetings about Sophie's stress levels, suggesting I reduce her homework load. I'd explained I couldn't give one student different requirements without academic justification. I spent that afternoon pulling together documentation, hospital visitor logs showing I'd checked in at 7:15 a.m. Saturday and hadn't left until 11:47 p.m., credit card receipts from the hospital cafeteria for lunch and dinner, text messages with Thomas, Grace, and my mother coordinating Dad's care throughout the day. Photos I'd taken of Dad in his hospital bed when he'd finally stabilized in the evening, time-stamped automatically by my phone. Easy Pass records showing my car traveling from my apartment in downtown Philadelphia to Jefferson Medical that morning, with no trips to Independence Hall or anywhere else. I called a lawyer that evening, someone Thomas's wife knew who handled education law cases. Leonard Strauss agreed to meet me the next morning at his office. Leonard was in his early 60s, precise and methodical. He listened to my account without interrupting, reviewed the documentation I'd assembled, and leaned back in his chair. "You have a comprehensive alibi for your physical location, but that doesn't explain how your signature ended up on the chaperone roster or why 3 students would make specific accusations against you. This suggests either deliberate fabrication by the students or someone actually impersonated you on the trip." I'd been thinking about that all night. The students are lying. The question is why they decided to coordinate accusations against me and whether anyone helped them plan this. Leonard made notes. "We need to find out who the other chaperones were, who would have noticed if someone claiming to be you wasn't actually you, and whether there's any security footage from Independence Hall that would show who was actually on that tour. Walk me through your recent interactions with these 3 students. Any conflicts? Any situations where they might feel aggrieved?" I explained Ashley's grade dispute, Kayla's phone incident, Sophie's mother's requests. Leonard focused on the pattern. 3 students who've all had conflicts with you over academic issues in the past few months. That's not coincidental. Private school students from wealthy families sometimes have distorted views of consequences and accountability. If they believed they could destroy your career as payback for what they perceive as unfair treatment, they might convince themselves it's justified. We needed to identify the other chaperones on Saturday's trip and determine what they'd actually observed. Leonard filed a formal request with Westridge Academy, demanding all documentation related to the field trip, including the signed roster, chaperone assignments, bus company records, and any photos or videos taken during the tour. He also demanded the specific statements the 3 students had provided, arguing I had a right to know the exact allegations against me. The school's lawyers pushed back, citing student privacy and ongoing investigation, but Leonard was aggressive. Your client has been accused of criminal assault. He has a right to see the evidence against him. If the school is claiming he was present based on a signed roster, we need to examine that document and determine its authenticity. The police contacted Leonard the next day, requesting an interview. We met at the precinct with Detective Raymond Cross and his partner, Detective Lisa Huang. I walked them through my timeline for Saturday, providing documentation for every claim. Detective Cross examined the evidence carefully. This documentation shows you were at Jefferson Medical, but we need to understand the discrepancy with the school records. Can you explain how your signature appears on the chaperone roster if you weren't there? I told them someone else must have signed my name, that I'd withdrawn from chaperoning 3 weeks earlier when my father was hospitalized. Detective Huang asked about my relationships with the 3 students. Have you had any conflicts with Ashley Morgenstein, Kayla Dennison, or Sophie Blackwell? Any reason they might make false accusations? I explained the grade disputes, the phone incident, the parental pressure. Detective Cross seemed skeptical. 3 teenage girls don't typically coordinate false assault allegations against a teacher over grades. That's extremely serious, potentially criminal behavior. What would motivate them to take that risk? I didn't have a good answer yet, but someone had motivated them, or someone had actually impersonated me on the trip, and either scenario required investigation beyond accepting the students' accusations at face value. The prosecutor assigned to review the case, a man named Kenneth Aldridge, requested a meeting with Leonard to discuss the evidence. We met at his office downtown. Kenneth was straightforward and professional. We have 3 alleged victims making consistent allegations about a teacher who signed the chaperone roster and was present during the field trip. We also have a teacher with extensive documentation proving he was 90 miles away at a hospital. These facts can't both be true. Leonard pressed the point. Which means you need to investigate how his name got on that roster and whether these students are telling the truth about their interactions with him. My client's alibi isn't a maybe, it's ironclad. Hospital security footage will show him there all day. That means either someone impersonated him or these students are lying. Kenneth agreed to subpoena the hospital security footage and to interview the other chaperones who'd been on the trip. He also agreed to have a forensic examiner review the chaperone roster to determine if the signature was authentic or forged. The waiting was torture. I spent my days on administrative leave in my apartment, watching news reports about teachers accused of misconduct, reading articles about false allegations and their aftermath. Even when proven innocent, teachers rarely recovered their reputations fully. Parents remembered the accusations more than the exonerations. Colleagues remained suspicious. The stigma lingered. My father was recovering well from his surgery, which was the only positive development. He'd been moved out of ICU and was progressing toward discharge. When I visited him that week, my mother pulled me aside in the hospital corridor. Thomas told us what happened. This is insane. You were here taking care of your father, and now you're being accused of assaulting students you weren't even near. What kind of children make up stories about something this serious? I didn't have an answer, but I was starting to form a theory about who might have helped orchestrate this. There was one person at Westridge who'd had significant conflict with me recently, who had access to administrative systems, who understood field trip procedures, and who might have reason to want me gone. Nathan Bridger, the assistant principal for student affairs. 6 months ago, Nathan had pushed for Westridge to adopt a policy reducing academic penalties for first-time plagiarism offenses, arguing that wealthy students shouldn't have their college prospects damaged by single mistakes. I'd opposed the policy publicly at a faculty meeting, arguing it created double standards and enabled entitled behavior. My opposition had rallied other teachers, and the policy had been defeated. Nathan had been furious, had accused me of undermining administrative authority and damaging student administrator trust. We'd barely spoken since then. Nathan also supervised field trip coordination. He would have had access to the chaperone roster. He would have known I'd withdrawn from the Independence Hall trip. He would have been able to forge my signature on the attendance sheet. And he would have had opportunities to manipulate students who'd had conflicts with me, potentially framing it as justified accountability for a teacher who was too harsh, too rigid, too unwilling to accommodate their needs. Leonard was intrigued when I shared this theory. If Bridger helped these students fabricate allegations, that's conspiracy, fraud, possibly witness tampering. But we need evidence connecting him to the accusations. The forensic examiner's report came back 3 days later. The signature on the chaperone roster was not mine. The handwriting analysis showed significant differences in letter formation, pressure patterns, and spacing compared to my authenticated signatures on other school documents. Someone had attempted to forge my signature, but hadn't replicated it accurately enough to fool an expert examination. Kenneth Aldridge called Leonard with the news. The signature is fraudulent. That changes everything. Someone signed Mr. Kowalski onto that trip knowing he wouldn't actually be there. We need to find out who had access to that roster and who benefited from framing him. The hospital security footage was even more conclusive. Cameras at the visitor entrance showed me arriving at 7:13 a.m. Saturday, checking in at the security desk, and taking the elevator to the ICU floor. Footage from various hospital corridors and the ICU waiting area showed me present throughout the day. There were no gaps where I could have left the building. Driven 90 miles to Independence Hall, assaulted 3 students, and returned without anyone noticing. The timeline was physically impossible. Detective Cross interviewed the other chaperones who'd been on the Independence Hall trip. 2 were parent volunteers. 1 was a junior faculty member named Rebecca Ashford. Rebecca's statement was damning. She told police she'd never actually seen me on the trip. She'd seen someone wearing a Westridge polo and khakis, who stayed near the back of the tour group, and whom students referred to as Mr. Kowalski, but she'd never gotten a clear look at his face. When pressed, she admitted she'd thought it was strange that I seemed to be avoiding interaction with other chaperones, but she'd assumed I was tired or wanted to focus on supervising students. Rebecca's description of the man she'd seen was revealing. Approximately 6 feet tall, medium build, wearing a baseball cap throughout the tour, kept his face angled away from the group, wore reading glasses similar to mine. She'd noticed the Westridge polo and the khaki pants and made assumptions based on those generic markers. The parent volunteers gave similar statements. They'd been told 4 chaperones would be on the trip. They'd seen 4 adults with the group. They'd assumed the man in the Westridge polo who signed in as David Kowalski was David Kowalski. None of them actually knew what I looked like well enough to notice an impersonation. Detective Huang showed Rebecca a photo lineup that included my picture and 5 similar-looking men. Rebecca couldn't identify me with certainty. When shown a photo of Nathan Bridger, her reaction was immediate. That could be him, the height and build are right. I didn't see his face clearly because of the cap, but that could definitely be the person who was on our tour. Police brought Nathan in for questioning. He initially denied being at Independence Hall, claimed he'd spent Saturday at home working on administrative reports. But when confronted with Rebecca's identification and the forensic evidence of the forged signature, his story started falling apart. His phone's location data, which police obtained through a warrant, showed he'd been in the vicinity of Independence Hall during the time of the field trip. Faced with mounting evidence, Nathan requested a lawyer. The next day, his attorney contacted Kenneth Aldridge offering cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Nathan admitted to forging my signature on the chaperone roster and impersonating me during the Independence Hall field trip. He claimed he'd done it as a reality check to show me what false accusations felt like after I'd allegedly made his job harder by opposing the plagiarism policy. But when pressed about the 3 students' allegations, Nathan claimed ignorance. He said he'd impersonated me on the trip, but hadn't actually assaulted anyone, hadn't interacted inappropriately with any students. The students must have fabricated their assault claims independently, possibly seeing an opportunity to pile on when they realized I was being accused of something. Kenneth wasn't buying it. 3 students don't spontaneously decide to make detailed assault allegations coinciding with your impersonation scheme. Either you assaulted them while pretending to be Kowalski, or you coordinated with them to make false reports. Either way, you're facing serious criminal charges. Nathan's lawyer negotiated. Nathan finally admitted to a more complex conspiracy. He'd approached the 3 students individually over the preceding weeks, students he knew had conflicts with me, and planted the idea that I'd been too harsh with them, too inflexible, too damaging to their academic prospects. He'd framed it as me being an obstacle to their success. Then, he'd suggested a plan. He would create a situation where they could make allegations that would end my career. He'd impersonate me on a field trip, creating plausible deniability for where I actually was, and they'd claim I'd assaulted them during the trip. The allegations wouldn't need to be proven in court. Nathan had told them. Private schools responded to accusations to protect their reputations. Even if charges were eventually dropped, I'd be finished at Westridge. The scandal would follow me to any other teaching position. It was revenge disguised as student advocacy. The 3 students were brought in for questioning with their parents and lawyers present. Ashley Morgenstein broke first. Confronted with Nathan's confession and the evidence of my hospital alibi, she admitted the assault allegations were fabricated. Nathan had approached her after her grade dispute, had sympathized with her frustration, had suggested I was the kind of teacher who damaged students' futures over minor issues. He'd proposed the plan as a way to hold me accountable for unfair grading practices. She'd believed she was justified in participating because, in her mind, I'd wronged her first by not giving her the grade she deserved. Kayla Dennison gave a similar account. Nathan had approached her after the phone incident, had told her I was known for being unreasonably strict, had suggested the field trip provided an opportunity to teach me a lesson about respecting students. She'd gone along with it because she'd been angry about the 0 on her exam and the impact on her grade. Sophie Blackwell's involvement was more complicated. Her statement revealed that Nathan had manipulated her differently. He'd told her I'd spoken to other faculty about her parents' divorce in ways that violated her privacy, had said I'd described her as emotionally unstable and unreliable. Sophie had been devastated by this alleged betrayal, had trusted Nathan's account because he was an administrator, and had agreed to participate in the false allegations as payback for what she believed was my gossip about her family situation. None of it was true. I'd never discussed Sophie's personal situation with anyone beyond the appropriate counseling staff who needed to know to support her. But Nathan had weaponized her vulnerability, her stress about her parents' divorce, and turned it into motivation for participating in a conspiracy to destroy my career. The criminal charges came down swiftly. Nathan Bridger was charged with identity theft, forgery, conspiracy to make false reports, and witness tampering. Ashley Morgenstein, Kayla Dennison, and Sophie Blackwell were charged as juveniles with conspiracy and making false reports. All 3 faced potential consequences, ranging from probation to juvenile detention. Though prosecutors indicated willingness to consider reduced charges in exchange for testimony against Nathan. The charges against me were dismissed immediately. Kenneth Aldridge issued a public statement exonerating me completely and apologizing for the investigation I'd endured. Westridge Academy was forced to respond. Victoria Brennan released a statement acknowledging I'd been falsely accused, that the school had failed to properly verify the allegations before taking action against me, and that I was welcome to return to teaching. But the damage was done. Parents had seen news reports about a teacher at Westridge being investigated for assaulting students. Even after my exoneration, some parents questioned whether I should be around their children. Online forums discussing private schools in the area featured threads debating my case, with some posters insisting that where there's smoke, there's fire, that the charges being dropped didn't necessarily mean nothing had happened. Leonard negotiated a settlement with Westridge. The school agreed to provide back pay for the period of my suspension, compensation for legal fees and emotional distress, and a letter of recommendation acknowledging my exemplary service and complete exoneration from the false allegations. They also agreed to implement new policies requiring corroboration of field trip attendance and prohibiting administrative action against faculty based solely on student allegations without investigation of factual circumstances. But I couldn't go back to that classroom. Couldn't face students knowing that 3 of them had been willing to destroy my life over grades and perceived slights. Couldn't work under administrators who'd believed accusations without investigating basic facts, like whether I'd actually been present at the location where assaults allegedly occurred. The preliminary hearings revealed more details about Nathan's planning. He'd spent weeks researching how to forge signatures convincingly, had practiced replicating my handwriting, had studied my typical clothing and mannerisms to impersonate me effectively. He'd worn a baseball cap during the field trip specifically to obscure his face from other chaperones while presenting enough visual markers, the Westridge polo, the khaki pants, the reading glasses, to pass casual observation. He'd deliberately stayed at the back of tour groups and avoided direct interaction with the parent volunteers who didn't know me well. The students had been instructed to provide consistent but not identical accounts of assault. Nathan had coached them on what details to include, the time of day, the location within Independence Hall, the physical descriptions of what I'd allegedly been wearing. He'd told them consistency across their statements would make the allegations more credible to investigators. The trial took place 8 months after that Monday morning when Victoria Brennan accused me of assaulting students. Nathan faced the most serious charges as the architect of the conspiracy. His defense attorney tried to argue he'd acted impulsively, that the impersonation had been poor judgment, but the assault allegations had been the student's idea. But prosecutors presented evidence of meticulous planning, weeks of preparation, deliberate manipulation of vulnerable teenagers, and calculated destruction of a colleague's career over professional disagreement. The students testified against Nathan as part of their plea agreements. Ashley described how Nathan had approached her in his office after her grade dispute, had said he understood her frustration, had suggested that teachers like me made Westridge's culture toxic for students. He'd proposed the plan gradually, first planting the idea that I deserved consequences, then suggesting the field trip provided an opportunity, then outlining specifically what she should claim had happened. Kayla's testimony was similar. Nathan had framed the conspiracy as student empowerment, as holding an unreasonable teacher accountable for policies that damaged their academic prospects and college applications. He'd made it sound like justified activism rather than criminal fraud. Sophie's testimony was the most emotional. She described trusting Nathan's claims that I'd violated her privacy, believing an administrator wouldn't lie about something so serious. She'd participated in the false allegations believing she was responding to genuine wrongdoing by me, only to discover later that Nathan had fabricated the entire premise. Her testimony included tearful apologies directed at me in the courtroom. "I'm sorry I believed him. I'm sorry I didn't verify what he told me. I destroyed your career over lies, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Nathan showed no remorse during the trial. His testimony was defensive and self-justifying. He claimed I'd undermined his authority at Westridge, had poisoned faculty relationships, had made his administrative role impossible by encouraging teachers to resist reasonable policy changes. The false allegations had been justified, in his view, as a necessary correction to someone who'd damaged the school's culture. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges. The judge's expression was severe during sentencing. Nathan Bridger was sentenced to 4 years in prison for conspiracy, identity theft, and witness tampering, with additional penalties for endangering the welfare of minors by manipulating students into criminal activity. The students, being juveniles, received probation and community service, with requirements for counseling to address their participation in the conspiracy. The families of Ashley, Kayla, and Sophie faced civil consequences. I filed lawsuits against their parents for the emotional distress, reputational damage, and career impact their daughter's false allegations had caused. The lawsuits weren't primarily about money, they were about accountability. Leonard argued that parents of privileged private school students needed to understand that their children's actions had consequences, that fabricating assault allegations wasn't acceptable behavior regardless of frustration over grades. The families settled the suits for substantial amounts, with public apologies included as conditions of settlement. Ashley's mother issued a statement acknowledging that her daughter's grade dispute didn't justify false allegations, that she should have taught her daughter to accept academic evaluation rather than seek revenge. Kayla's father admitted he'd contributed to his daughter's sense of entitlement by pressuring teachers to change grades and policies to benefit her. Sophie's parents issued a joint statement despite their divorce, acknowledging their daughter had been manipulated, but accepting responsibility for not teaching her to verify serious accusations before participating in conspiracies. Westridge Academy faced its own reckoning. Several parents withdrew their children, citing concerns about an administration that had accused a teacher without investigating basic facts. Victoria Brennan resigned under pressure from the Board of Trustees. Gerald Hutchins, the school attorney who'd handled my initial suspension so poorly, was replaced. The school hired new leadership and implemented comprehensive policy reforms addressing how allegations against faculty should be investigated before administrative action. I couldn't return to classroom teaching. The trauma of false accusations, the knowledge that students could coordinate to destroy a teacher's career over grades, the media coverage associating my name with assault allegations, even after exoneration, made returning impossible. I used part of the settlement money to pursue a doctorate in education policy, focusing my research on false allegations in academic settings and the need for procedural protections for educators. I found work with a non-profit organization developing protocols for schools investigating misconduct allegations, emphasizing the importance of verifying basic facts before taking action against accused parties. I spoke at education conferences about my experience, about how schools' fear of liability and desire to protect their reputations could lead to rushing judgment against teachers without due process. Some educators criticized me, saying my focus on false allegations undermined genuine victims of misconduct. But others understood that protecting teachers from fabricated accusations and protecting students from actual misconduct weren't opposing goals. Both required careful investigation, respect for evidence, and rejection of assumptions based solely on who made allegations first. I testified before a state legislative committee examining teacher rights and student discipline. I described how Nathan had manipulated the system, how 3 students had weaponized assault allegations over academic disputes, how I'd been presumed guilty until overwhelming evidence proved the physical impossibility of the accusations. The committee ultimately passed legislation requiring schools to conduct preliminary investigations, verifying the factual basis of allegations before suspending teachers, protecting educators from administrative action based on unverified claims while maintaining protections for genuine victims. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from Sophie Blackwell. She was in her first year at college, studying psychology, and had been working with a therapist to process her participation in the conspiracy. "I know my apology in court wasn't enough," she wrote. "I destroyed your career because I trusted an adult who lied to me, and because I let my anger override my judgment. I've been following your work on education policy, and I'm grateful you found a way to use this terrible experience to help other teachers and students. I hope someday you can forgive me for what I did to you." I wrote back telling her that forgiveness was complex, that I appreciated her continued remorse and her efforts to make amends through therapy and education. I told her the best way to honor the damage she'd caused was to become the kind of person who verified serious accusations before acting on them, who questioned authority when it demanded participation in unethical behavior, who stood up for truth even when it was uncomfortable. I kept her letter in my desk alongside the documentation from my case, a reminder that the justice system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but had ultimately exposed the truth and held conspirators accountable. Nathan Bridger was released after serving 3 years of his sentence. I didn't follow his case closely, didn't need updates on his post-prison life. He'd stolen months of my life and years of my teaching career, but I refused to let him occupy more mental space than necessary. 4 years after that Monday morning when Victoria Brennan accused me of assault, I stood in front of a room full of school administrators, delivering a keynote address on procedural fairness in misconduct investigations. I told them my story, watching their faces shift from discomfort to understanding. "Verify before you act," I told them. "Investigate before you suspend. Protect alleged victims, but don't presume guilt. Every teacher deserves the basic respect of having their alibi checked before you destroy their career." One administrator asked if I'd ever forgiven Westridge Academy for their handling of my case. I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about me refusing to carry their failure forward. They made catastrophic mistakes that cost me my classroom, but I've built something better from those ruins. That's my version of justice. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.